Greetings, my name's Guy Dauncey. This is a show called Change the World, where we indulge ourselves for half an hour in being positive, in being visionary, in being practical, in dealing with solutions. And we'd leave aside the moaning and complaining for a while, because after all, when did it ever get us anywhere? My guest today is Gene Miller.
But that's all I want to do is moan and whine and
complain. But it's a New York thing.
Right.
You live in Victoria now, not New York. Gene was born in New York, moved to Canada in 1970, came to Victoria, of all places, right? Founded Open Space, the Downtown Arts and Cultural Centre in 1971, within a year of getting here. And you also ran a whole series of conferences called Gaining Ground Urban Sustainability Conferences in Victoria and Vancouver and Calgary.
Yes.
And you now, as well as I'm sure a host of things you haven't told me about, write a regular column for Focus magazine, which is a sort of one of the prides of Victoria's deep thinking, engaged literary scene.
I think it's a great publication, and I would say that if I didn't write for them.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I picked up on, I mean, I've known you for a long time, but I wanted to have you on the show because your current column, with the obscure Latin title Panis Angelicus, which makes me think you're suddenly a Catholic, right, is actually about can we make Victoria a real focus for social strength, commonwealth, and not another story of fire and fury, doom and gloom. Okay. Fire and fury being a reference to the realm of Trump. Yes.
So is that something I'm supposed to respond to?
First of all, what is it that you love about Victoria as a city?
That's a delicious question.
Good. Tuck in. That's just the first course.
is what it delivers and what it promises.
Okay. What does it deliver?
Community. I think it delivers a level of human connection or opportunities for human connection that, for me, particularly at this point in my life, are a paramount interest.
Yes. Does Victoria do that more than other communities you've experienced?
Yes, it does. And I can't exactly account for it. The fact that it's a bit of a business backwater or an economic backwater doesn't hurt in the least.
Seems to be thriving financially.
It is thriving financially, but I think that level of economic activity and social rhythm are connected.
Right.
And I think that the social rhythms here are they're promising. They're permissive.
Right.
I think they intensify opportunities for human connection.
Well, I certainly, in my personal experience, I arrived here in 1990 from England, which is, as immigration goes, has to be the easiest possible change you can make, England to Victoria, right? But within a year, I was sitting as the chair of the City of Victoria's Environment Advisory Committee, and no one said, what right have you got to do that? You're just a newcomer. I was full embrace of a newcomer with new ideas, no resistance. And I thought, this is fresh. This is encouraging of new ideas and creativity.
Yeah. Victoria is not an intellectual NIMBY.
Right.
Yeah. And it's one of the sweetest things. The quality of welcome in this city is, or has been, remarkable.
Yeah.
I hope it continues.
But I have heard people say to me that if they come from the prairies, they find Victoria a very lonely city. Because they expected, in a small prairie town, you've got built-in family, built-in neighborhood, people have known each other 50 years, and suddenly, I mean, I'll tell you a linked story to that. When my wife and Carolyn and I organized a street party on our street in North Oak Bay,
yes.
I knocked on the door of a teacher who was retired, and she understood we were organizing a street party, and she said, you know, there was a furniture van moved in across the road recently, so I went and I said, welcome to the neighborhood. And they said, that's very kind of you, but we've been living here 7 years and we're just moving out.
Very great story.
And that's saying very weak community. It was suburban Oak Bay.
I understand. Why do prairie people find this a lonely place?
I think because in a prairie town they've got generations of cousins and uncles and aunts and grandparents living in the same community. And because maybe the experience during the Depression forced them together and forced them to have a stronger sense of community than we have in Victoria.
Yeah.
And so it's granted you greet the stranger and welcome them. We don't greet the stranger until they've expressed an interest in something you have a common interest with.
I think you're right. I think there's a quality or a condition of social caution in this city.
Right.
Something has to break the ice, something has to open the door. But then I think the welcome is fairly fulsome.
Yes.
Do you have to work at it? Of course you have to work at it. Do you have to work at community and neighborliness? Yes, you do. I walk through Beacon Hill Park. I live adjacent to it every day. I make a conscious choice to say hello or good morning to people. If you make that choice, you get good things back.
Right.
If you don't, it's strangers passing.
I've had the experience of walking along Dallas Road, along the path there.
Yeah.
And sometimes when there's too many people, you can't stop and say hello to everyone.
Right.
But I feel that unconsciously, everyone I pass would be a lovely conversation. Yeah. And they'd be willing to engage in it.
Yes.
And it wouldn't be a, who are you?
This isn't a who are you town.
Right.
Yeah. And when did you say you got here?
1990.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you dove right in.
I dove right in. I never had a problem diving right in. It's my personality, right? And I made friends very quickly and immediately.
Yeah.
And my wife did too, as Carolyn. And yes, there's a freshness of air in the. On the other hand, I do recall someone, a local Victorian person, who's a climate denier, who has attacked me vociferously on the radio for saying that climate change is real, and who, when the first bike lanes were put in on Fort Street, wrote a letter to the Times columnist, ranting and frothing at the mouth how terrible this was, and we shouldn't allow bicycles, and me, I'm entitled to be a car driver. So we know from the present semi-quiet uprising against bike lanes that sentiment exists, which is not tolerant.
Well, sure it exists. It exists everywhere. I mean, Victoria's not immune to the conditions that are driving and plaguing the world.
It'd be boring if we all thought the same thing.
or it might be heaven on earth. You never can tell. Right. I wonder about that a lot. I want to report to you that I'm not depressed, but I am pessimistic these days.
Okay. So spend 3 minutes on your pessimism, the grounds for that.
I just, the quickest thing for me to do, let me read something to you from something I just found on the web today.
Okay.
To better get a handle on how wide open the future seems today, it's useful to draw on the concept that the futurist Peter Schwartz once dubbed the official future. In the United States, for much of the last quarter century, the official future might be described this way. Domestically, the United States was destined to remain what it had always been, a two-party multicultural federalist democracy dedicated to capitalism, technological optimism, and creating better lives for our children. Likewise, internationally, the United States would remain the center of the global order as well as the world's greatest military power, what Madeleine Albright called the indispensable nation, dedicated to promoting economic growth, democracy, and human rights the world over. Today, in the United States, a year after Donald Trump's improbable election, an event that the official future had declared was categorically impossible, the post-Cold War official future has collapsed.
Right.
For better or worse, the aura of inevitability associated with the old official future has evaporated. And I quote those words because they're interesting on their own terms, but also because they characterize the pessimism I'm feeling.
Right.
And I've been thinking of Victoria, and I wrote about this in a previous column, but I'm happy to talk with you about it at greater length if you wish. I would love to put my energies, I think I do put my energies into trying to make Victoria what I call a civilizational lifeboat.
A civilizational lifeboat.
It's pretty simple. There are no guarantees that the calm times that most of us have known much of our lives, they're not guaranteed.
Can I change the metaphor?
You may.
A lifeboat assumes you've all got to jump into it. Could it be a civilizational lighthouse?
Sure.
So that other people can learn from...
In fact, thank you. I like that even better. Yeah.
Otherwise, they're all going to come and jump in the lifeboat and it's all going to sink.
Oh, we don't want that to happen.
Something where I read 70% of Canadians want to live in Victoria, or some ridiculous number that the realtors like to tell you, right?
Is that
It was
conceivable?
a huge number, but well, it's cold out there, and we got the flowers in January.
Well, somebody should interview a cross-section of those Canadians who want to come to Victoria and ask them why.
Yes, but it creates getting off topic a little bit, the fact that so many people do want to come here creates a huge crisis for those who can't afford to buy a house and find a place to live.
Sure.
Because those coming here are generally coming with capital and buying houses.
Sure.
So how do we, that's another topic which may be less cultural, but practical, affordable housing crisis. But I want to stay with the quality of community that has a vibration that's there in Victoria. You said sometimes it doesn't deliver though. Is there more needed to build that? Is it threatened?
I'm discovering in my dotage that not all outcomes can be legislated.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that bears on our city as much as it does anything else. I'm actually circling back to your point about homelessness and
Yes.
people who are in need of housing.
Right.
I read that every city in North America has a significant homeless problem.
Right. And I was just in what probably is last week's interview talking to Ana Maria Peredo,
Yes.
who's saying in her native Peru, among the First Nations there, they cannot conceive of someone not having a home. Because their social wealth,
I get that.
of course you have a house to live in, right? We're primitive.
Why those values have not been sustained or reintroduced in a place like Victoria, I don't understand.
Right.
I would love the quality of welcome to be the welcome of people who feel so large about their lives,
Yes.
so generous about their lives, that would translate into policy and legislation that would make homelessness almost inconceivable.
Well, Leslie Campbell was telling me that a while ago Focus magazine ran a contest on how to solve the homelessness crisis, and one of the people who wrote the essays led to a public meeting which 800 people showed up at, out of a determination that, yeah, we do totally need to end this homelessness problem.
And then what happened?
Well, it probably got bogged down in bureaucracy and rules and financing and stuff that gets your eyeballs rolling.
Well,
I mean, you've been in the development field, you know how stuff can get complicated.
with the drop of a hat, no question.
Tell me the story about View Street Towers and the paint.
I don't remember the story.
The View Street Towers building was just becoming more and more a centre for drugs, and down at heel, and you called the owner in Alberta.
You're going to have to tell me my story.
Oh my goodness!
Well, listen, when you get to be my age, your memory will be porous.
As you told me, the owner in Alberta was purely interested in getting the money out of things. He said, why should I paint it? I still get the same income.
Right.
And you phoned him up and said, look, I'm a developer, you're a developer. You're putting our community to shame by your bad behavior. For goodness sake, at least paint your building. And he painted it. So which thank you for that intervention.
You are welcome. It was great to hear the story. I had forgotten it.
Right.
As you told it, I felt like I had a completely fictional relationship to it. So thank you.
Maybe it was a very small thing for you. It just is something you did because you were frustrated with that, right?
But I behave that way.
To me, the quality of our built architectural urban environment is hugely important. If you're walking down the street and you see beauty or art or a place to pause or a lovely garden, you feel really good.
That's what this city, that's this city's ace in the hole.
Right. And conversely, if you walk down the street and it's all neglected and the fences are broken and no one's caring and there's litter, you're going to get depressed.
Or if the buildings are ugly or feel anonymous or feel like file boxes.
Yes.
It doesn't take a lot.
In fact, we're staying in Fairfield at a friend's house, and we walk around all the local streets, and there was one brand new box there, brand new house. Sure, it cost $500,000. It's like a metal box out of some engineering magazine.
Have you noticed that a lot of the contemporary houses that are going up look like fire stations?
Is it postmodernism?
I can't explain it to myself, but they don't look warm, they don't look welcoming.
Yeah, maybe it'll pass.
And it's interesting that there is architectural vocabulary that communicates welcome and friendship.
Is it IKEA? When every bookshelf has got to be plain and white and straight, so let's make the house plain and white and straight? Because that heritage architecture, we all love it, with the variety of color and paint and involvement, and you can tell that house is loved.
I would go even further, which is if you go street driving or street walking with people, everybody's heart just melts when they walk by a house that feels like a home.
Yeah.
And I say that's a strong suit in Victoria, and I worry that by policy and careless habit,
Yes.
it either is diminishing or could diminish.
That could be really bad. I know in Britain, after the Second World War, when the Nazis had bombed a whole bunch of houses, you can look on a street of Victorian houses and you'll see where the bombs took houses out. Because in the 50s, when everyone was feeling depressed and exhausted, they replaced them with square concrete boxes.
No kidding.
And they're ugly. They lost the patience to do a tiny bit of design and bring in some color or some beauty to it. They're just ugly boxes. And I mean, in the 1950s, people were pretty exhausted after the war, but we're not in the 1950s anymore.
No.
We should be celebrating art, culture, design, urban planning.
This is a wonderful statement, and thank God this show is going to be on TV so I can actually watch it and write the words down. How do you translate the condition you just described into civic policy and civic practice?
You know when you drive through Duncan and on the main road through, you think, why is this place so ugly, right?
Yes.
And then I look closer and I think they've really tried hard. They've got great landscaping, they've got totem poles. Then I looked at the buildings, and there's 124 buildings as you drive through, and only 5 have any architectural merit. So I'm saying there was no architectural design panel. There was no community involvement in how buildings were done. So having the community engaged in architectural design, and not just the architects even, I think that's a big part of how you get beauty on the street.
I don't disagree with you. I think that a lot of the people who put their time and energy, invest their time and energy in achieving those outcomes, feel that City Hall is their worst enemy.
Now, is that because City Hall feels the urgency to build affordable housing as rapidly as possible, and so otherwise they can't tackle the housing crisis?
I think it's a lack of imagination, and it may be something in civic process or municipal process or bureaucratic process that calls for a level of intellectual efficiency or aesthetic efficiency.
So could you, or Focus Magazine, create an annual set of prizes for the most creative, colorful bureaucrat? And you don't have to get the department manager's approval for nominating this person, right?
That's a wonderful and a wild idea, and very typical of you.
Because I read somewhere that at the lowest level of management, you can have a bit of independence.
Yes.
At the top, you can because you're in charge, but in the middle, you are more conservative, you don't want to rock the boat, you do what you're told, and so you end up with boring decisions.
I also think it's a function of time.
Okay.
I think that aesthetic outcomes, or the kinds of outcomes we're talking about, take time, and I think that there's something in the nature of civic process which is tick, 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 tick.
Yes, right.
And that expresses itself in policy decisions and legislation. And that, I think, is why folks at a community level often feel that they're not working with City Hall but against it.
Yeah. So I think Port Coquitlam had a thing called a sustainability scorecard. So for any development, just looking at sustainability now, not beauty. So it's saying you need to score. Have you got bicycle trails? Have you got energy efficiency? Have you got park space? All this stuff. And if you don't get enough points, the planning department is not going to waste time addressing it because it's a community bad and not a community good. If you could imagine a similar point system for beauty, however, which is a difficult concept to define.
Just put me in charge. Everything will work out okay.
Well, I'm sure you know the beloved sculpture in front of the Save on Foods arena. Someone said the same, put me in charge and I'll give you a beautiful sculpture. And it's the second worst sculpture in Victoria. What's the first one? What's the first worst sculpture in Victoria?
Oh, there are so many candidates.
The mattresses.
The mattresses, yeah, the concrete ping pong. And they just look cruddy. I drove by them yesterday.
And dirty and diseased.
Oh.
Is that the best we
They
can
look like old used mattresses.
Is that the best we can do?
But by the way, are you still high up on the sustainability horse? Are you still riding that?
Absolutely.
Good.
Yeah. Well, I'm now. I spent 20 years working on the climate change
Yes.
issue, and now I'm technically, well, I am fully engaged in working in a new book to redefine what our whole economy is and rethink the economy. And you can't rethink economy without including nature, because our current economy trashes nature. It just ignores it. It's called an externality. So yes, I'm fully involved in sustainability thinking.
Excellent.
How does that tie into urban commonwealth and beauty?
Whew. I think that we are at a critical chapter in the transformation from nature as designer to humanity as designer. And I think the coin is slowly flipping in the air as to whether that comes down successfully or unsuccessfully.
You know, I was reading recently about the time in the Victorian period when the Great Exhibition happened.
Yes.
And I forget who I was reading, but he'd seen a huge industrial boiler. The shining cogs and spanners and wheels and chains. And
Yes.
the person went into a rhapsody of spiritual ecstasy about the incredible machinery. And I see then, okay, nature's boring, machinery's wonderful. And the sense that from now on humans will dominate nature because look what amazing things we can do. And now we're on the flip side of saying, well, maybe that's not so good. Do we really want to lose the beauty of nature? So I see the movement that way, but I see ecological ignorance as a big barrier.
I would go a little bit further and
Okay.
say that I think that humanity, and I don't understand a lot of this, I'm reaching around my own corners for it. Humanity is in the process of supplanting, replacing nature as the designer of the physical and potentially even the living world.
Replacing or moving back into partnership. We have replaced it with our big modern cities. We just knocked it all down, cut it down, blasted it to pieces.
I'm thinking of AI and robotics.
Okay, artificial intelligence. This is a wonderful side turn in the conversation.
Well, and as I say, I'm reaching
Yes.
deep into the dark on this one, but I've been thinking about it, that, a lot of people want to credit God or a spiritual designer with the world as it is.
Yes.
I move a little bit away from that and think of nature as the designer, and I don't understand the forces or the impulse or the what that is or the where that came from, and that would be an intriguing topic for another hour.
And the way you define nature, it would go right back to the Big Bang, or does it start with
Yes.
life? Right
It starts with
thing.
life.
Starts with life.
Yeah, I
okay.
think it starts with life. If you really take a moment to try to understand why life ever happened, and what its purpose was, if it can be said to have a purpose, you can get lost in the stars.
Yes.
But what interests me is that I think we're in a very interesting transition period where where AI and robotics represent some initial essays in the replacement, in taking over that role, taking over nature's role in the creation of life. And I don't mean that life will be exactly as we've known it in the past.
I mean, certainly the revolutions in genetic biology and medicine and stuff just in the last 20 years, and then you go out 200, 2,000 years, you can see where that'd be going. But does a robotic existence have consciousness? We have consciousness. From all my understanding, there's no computer program, even if it's the Go champion of the world, does not have consciousness. And if you haven't got consciousness, you can't have agency unless it's programmed by a set of decision matrices using digital reality. We are analog reality with consciousness.
I say be patient. I say that scientists and innovators will not stop until they have isolated that condition and found a way to produce it.
That's assuming a reductionist and materialist approach. I mean, certainly
Yes.
Francis Crick took that approach, But Christoph Koch, who's a neuroscientist out of Seattle, studied the same problem and said, no, he thinks all of existence is panpsychic, that even molecules and atoms have consciousness. So it can go either way.
What an interesting idea.
Yeah, so that led me to think, well, if maybe does consciousness pre-exist matter? And then we take it for granted that trees have consciousnesses, rivers have consciousness. I mean, obviously, if you look at a cat, would you say a cat has consciousness?
Yes.
Yes. Then if a cat does a worm have consciousness? You can see where I'm going with this.
Yes.
So if you go down the evolutionary chain to the molecule, you either got to say that consciousness came in from outer space, or that it was inherent within all along. I don't know a third option.
The third option is Aquinas'. The answer to why is God.
Well, yes.
Now, how did we get there?
Well, let me.
I'll take all the blame.
Is there a spiritual dimension to the quality of community that we are building in Victoria?
I think there is.
And what does it mean for you?
It has to do with where you imagine you start and stop.
Okay.
And I think there's an enormous amount of cultural pressure these days to see yourself as your own author.
Right.
And to put your individuality well ahead of community and connection.
Yes, yeah.
And I think that whatever the counter messages or the counter forces are, they need amplification.
Yeah.
When I talk about Victoria as a civilization lifeboat and now lighthouse,
Yes.
what I mean is a place that will ponder this topic. Ponder the topic.
Well, I think we have to leave it there and invite everyone who's in a pub or going to a pub after this to take that topic up.
We're not leaving anything. We're going on for the next 6 hours.
So, Gene, I have to extend my hand and thank you for being an innovator in Victoria.
Thanks.
For being a champion for social beauty values.
Thanks.
And wind the show up, because that's the way it goes, these things.
That
we haven't
is.
got control over time. Time is limited. My name is Guy Dauncey. This has been the show Change the World. If you would enjoy watching the show and you'd like to be on the show, follow my email, guydauncey@earthfuture.com, and tune in next week for more scintillating conversation into the depths of consciousness and culture.
Wow, thanks, Guy.